The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach like a promise of violence, and Deanna Foster knew she was about to die. She pressed her face against the window of the rattling coach, watching three riders gaining ground across the New Mexico desert. The year was 1878, and Empire City was still 2 hours away according to the driver who now shouted warnings from above. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, clutched each other in fear as gunshots cracked through the hot September air. "They're going to rob us," the merchant whispered, his face pale beneath his derby hat. "Those are the Garson brothers. I heard about them in Santa Fe. They don't leave witnesses." Deanna's heart hammered against her ribs. She had come west to start fresh after her father's death, carrying the last of his savings sewn into her dress. Everything she owned in the world was in the trunk strapped to the top of this coach. She was 22 years old, and her life was about to end before it had truly begun. The stagecoach lurched suddenly, veering off the main road. The driver was making a desperate attempt to outrun their pursuers, but the terrain grew rougher, and Diana heard the horses screaming in protest. Another gunshot rang out, closer this time, and she heard the sickening thud of a bullet striking wood. "Get down!" the merchant shouted, pulling his wife to the floor. Deanna crouched low, her hands shaking as she gripped the seat. Through the window, she could see nothing but dust and the blur of sage brush. The coach hit something hard, and she was thrown against the wall, her shoulder striking the frame with brutal force. Then, as suddenly as the chase had begun, the coach slowed. Deanna heard the driver's voice, high and frightened, calling out that he was stopping. The wheels ground against the hard earth, and silence fell over everything except the labored breathing of the horses. "Everyone out," a rough voice commanded from outside. "Nice and slow, and maybe we'll let you live." Diana's legs trembled as she stood. The merchant helped his wife up, and together they stumbled toward the door. The sunlight was blinding after the dim interior of the coach. 3 men on horseback surrounded them, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats, bandanas covering their lower faces. The tallest of them, presumably the leader, gestured with his revolver. "Valuables. Now. Everything you got." The merchant immediately began emptying his pockets. His wife pulled off her rings with shaking fingers. Deanna stood frozen, thinking of the money in her dress. That money was supposed to buy her a new life. It was supposed to pay for lodging while she found work, supposed to keep her fed until she could stand on her own feet. "You deaf girl." The leader swung down from his horse and walked toward her. "I said everything. I have nothing," Deanna heard herself say, "just some clothes in my trunk." The man laughed, a harsh sound that made her skin crawl. "Then we'll check that trunk, but first." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh. "Let's see what you might be hiding under that pretty dress." Diana jerked back, but his grip was iron. The other passengers looked away, helpless. The driver remained on his perch, his hands raised, a trickle of blood running down his arm from where a bullet had grazed him. "Let her go." The voice came from behind the bandits, calm and steady as stone. Deanna twisted in the man's grip to see a lone rider sitting astride a paint horse about 30 yards away. He wore a dark vest over a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow. 2 revolvers hung at his hips, and a rifle rested across his saddle. The bandit leader released Diana and turned. "This ain't your business, friend. Move along." "Can't do that." The rider nudged his horse forward a few paces. "You're blocking the road and you're troubling these people. That makes it my business." "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," one of the other bandits called out. "You might want to reconsider your mathematics." The rider's hand moved to rest on one of his revolvers. "Mathematics never was my strong suit, but I'm good at other things." The tension stretched taut as a wire. Deanna could barely breathe. The sun beat down mercilessly and sweat trickled between her shoulder blades. She watched the lone rider, wondering if he was brave or simply insane. "Last warning," the leader said, drawing his gun. "Ride away or die here." The rider moved before the bandit finished speaking. His hand blurred, and suddenly his revolver was firing. The sound was deafening in the desert silence. The leader's gun flew from his hand, and he shouted in pain. The other two bandits reached for their weapons, but the rider was already moving, his horse dancing sideways as he fired again. One bandit's hat flew off his head, taking a chunk of hair with it. The third bandit's gun belt exploded in a spray of leather and metal, the bullet somehow striking the buckle. "Next one goes between someone's eyes," the rider said, his voice still calm. "Your choice which one of you it is." The leader clutched his bleeding hand, his eyes wide with shock and fury. But he was also smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. "This isn't over," he snarled, stumbling back to his horse. His companions were already mounting, their faces pale. "Yes, it is," the rider said. "And if I see you on this road again, I won't be aiming for hands and hats." The three bandits wheeled their horses and took off across the desert, dust billowing behind them. Deanna sagged against the stagecoach, her legs barely holding her up. The merchant was comforting his sobbing wife, and the driver was wrapping his wounded arm with a handkerchief. The rider holstered his gun and approached slowly. As he drew closer, Deanna could finally see his face. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over water, and there was something in them that spoke of deep weariness beneath the calm exterior. "Everyone all right?" he asked, his gaze moving over each of them before settling on Deanna. "Thanks to you," the merchant managed, his voice shaking. "I thought we were done for." The rider dismounted and approached the driver. "That wound needs proper attention. Empire City's about 2 hours east. You'll make it, but keep it clean." He pulled a flask from his saddlebag and handed it up. "Pour some of this on it. It'll hurt like hell, but it'll keep infection out." The driver nodded gratefully. "We're in your debt, mister. I'm Tom Hastings. These folks are headed to Empire City too." "Preston Nash," the rider said simply. He looked at Deanna again. "You're shaking. Might want to sit down before you fall down." Deanna realized he was right. The fear and adrenaline were leaving her body and her legs felt like water. Preston took her arm, gently this time, and guided her to a flat rock in the shade of the coach. "Head down," he instructed. "Breathe slow. You're safe now." "How did you do that?" Deanna whispered. "The shooting, I mean. I've never seen anyone move so fast." Something dark flickered across Preston's face. "Practice. Too much practice." Before she could ask what he meant, the merchant approached. "Mr. Nash, we owe you our lives. Please, let me pay you something for your trouble." Preston shook his head. "No payment necessary, just happened to be riding the same road." "But surely," I said no. Preston's voice remained quiet, but there was steel beneath it. The merchant fell silent. Tom Hastings called down from the driver's seat. "Mr. Nash, you heading to Empire City? We'd feel a lot safer if you'd ride along with us the rest of the way." Preston glanced at Deanna, then back at the driver. "I suppose I could do that. Was heading that direction anyway." They got underway again, the stagecoach rolling east with Preston riding alongside. Deanna sat by the window, unable to stop watching him. He sat his horse with easy grace, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. There was something about him that drew her attention beyond gratitude for her rescue. He moved like a man carrying invisible weight, and those storm cloud eyes held shadows she couldn't name. The merchant and his wife dozed fitfully, exhausted by fear. Deanna was too keyed up to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bandit's hand reaching for her, felt his fingers digging into her arm. But then she'd open her eyes and see Preston riding beside the coach, and the fear would recede. About an hour into the journey, Preston rode closer to her window. "You doing all right, miss?" "Foster, Deanna Foster. And yes, I think so, thanks to you." He nodded but said nothing more, pulling his horse back to a more comfortable distance. Deanna found herself wanting him to stay to talk with her, but she couldn't find the words to ask. Empire City appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains. It was larger than Deanna expected, a sprawling town that had grown up around the railroad and the nearby silver mines. Buildings lined wide streets, and she could see the gleaming tracks cutting through the center of town. People moved along wooden sidewalks, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons. The stagecoach pulled up in front of the depot, and everyone climbed out stiffly. Tom Hastings wrapped his wounded arm carefully and said, "First thing I'm doing is finding a doctor. Second thing is a drink. Mr. Nash, I meant what I said. We're in your debt." Preston had already dismounted and was untying Deanna's trunk from the top of the coach. He set it down carefully on the sidewalk, then tipped his hat to the group. "Glad everyone made it safely. You all take care now." He was turning to leave when Deanna called out, "Wait." Preston paused, looking back at her. Up close, she could see faint scars on his hands and a thin white line along his jaw. His eyes met hers, and she felt something shift in her chest. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "You saved my life, our lives." "You already thanked me," Preston said quietly. "Words aren't enough." "Please, let me buy you dinner at least. Or a drink." Preston's jaw tightened and he glanced away. "That's kind of you, Miss Foster, but I'm not fit company for a lady. You just saved me from 3 armed bandits. I think you're exactly the kind of company I need." A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "You don't know anything about me. Then let me learn." Deanna surprised herself with her boldness, but something about this man made her want to push past his walls. "Please. I'm new in town, I don't know anyone, and I'd like to thank my rescuer properly. 1 meal. Surely you can spare that much time." Preston looked at her for a long moment, and she saw conflict warring in his eyes. Finally, he sighed. 1 meal. But then I've got to be moving on." Deanna's heart lifted. 1 meal, she agreed. "Where should we go? The Empire Hotel has a decent dining room. It's respectable." Preston picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "I'm guessing you'll need a room there too." "Yes. I was planning to stay there until I find more permanent lodging." They walked together through the evening streets of Empire City. The town was busy with miners finishing their shifts, merchants closing up shop, and cowboys driving cattle through the streets toward the holding pens by the railroad. Lanterns were being lit along the main thoroughfare, casting warm pools of light. The Empire Hotel was a 3-story building with a painted sign and lace curtains in the windows. Preston held the door for Deanna and followed her inside with her trunk. The lobby was neat and clean, with a worn but serviceable carpet and a desk where a middle-aged woman stood sorting papers. "Help you folks?" she asked, her eyes moving between them with curiosity. "I need a room, please," Deanna said. "Something modest but clean. We've got a nice room on the 2nd floor, front of the building, $1 a night or $5 for the week." Deanna hesitated, calculating her limited funds. "I'll take it for a week to start." As she paid, Preston stood back, his hand resting on the trunk. The hotel keeper, whose name was Mrs. Patterson according to the sign on the desk, eyed him with recognition. "Good to see you back in town, Mr. Nash. Staying out of trouble, I hope." "Always trying, Mrs. Patterson." "Uh-huh." The woman didn't sound convinced, but she smiled anyway. Your usual room is available if you need it. Not tonight, just passing through. Something in his tone discouraged further questions. Mrs. Patterson handed Deanna a key and gestured to the stairs. Second door on the right. Washroom at the end of the hall. Dinner is served until 8 in the dining room. Preston carried Deanna's trunk upstairs and set it inside her room. The space was small but tidy, with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Deanna realized with a start that this was her new life, everything she owned in that trunk, alone in a strange town, except for the enigmatic man standing in her doorway. "Give me a few minutes to freshen up," she asked. "Then we can have that dinner." Preston nodded. "I'll wait downstairs." Deanna washed her face and hands quickly, then changed into a clean dress, brushing the dust from her hair. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a young woman with dark hair and hazel eyes, her face still pale from the day's events. She pinched her cheeks to bring color back and took a deep breath before heading downstairs. Preston was standing by a window in the lobby, staring out at the street. He'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "You clean up nice," he said, then seemed embarrassed by the compliment. "I mean, you look well." "Thank you." Deanna smiled. "So do you." The dining room was half full with guests and a few townspeople. A waitress showed them to a table by the window, and Preston held Diana's chair for her before sitting across from her. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a strong jaw and those remarkable eyes. But there were lines around his mouth that spoke of pain, and a wariness in the way he held himself. "So, Miss Foster," Preston said after they'd ordered steak and potatoes, "what brings you to Empire City?" "Please call me Deanna, and I'm here to start over. My father passed away 6 months ago back in Missouri. There was nothing left for me there, so I decided to come west and try to build a new life." "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you. He was a good man, a teacher. He raised me on his own after my mother died when I was young." Deanna took a sip of water. "What about you? Are you from Empire City originally?" Preston's jaw tightened. "No, I'm from a lot of places and nowhere in particular." "That's mysterious. That's intentional." Deanna leaned forward slightly. "You saved my life today, Mr. Nash. I think I'm entitled to know at least a little about my rescuer." Preston was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I used to work for the railroad, security. That's how I learned to shoot." "Just security work, among other things." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. The waitress brought their meals, and they ate in silence for a while. Deanna found herself watching Preston's hands, noting the scars on his knuckles, the careful way he handled his knife and fork. Everything about him spoke of controlled violence, of a man who had seen and done things he wanted to forget. "Those men today," Deanna said softly. "The bandits. You've dealt with men like that before, haven't you?" Preston looked up at her, and his eyes were bleak. "Yes, many times. More than I can count, more than I want to remember. And yet you saved us. You didn't have to, you could have ridden on." "No," Preston said, his voice rough. "I couldn't have. Not and lived with myself after." Deanna felt her heart constrict. "You're a good man, Preston Nash." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know me well enough to say that. Then tell me something that proves me wrong." Preston set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "I've killed men, Deanna, not in self-defense, not always because I had to. I worked as a hired gun for the railroad, running off homesteaders and small ranchers who were in the way of the tracks. I told myself I was just doing my job, following orders. But that doesn't change what I did." The words hung between them like smoke. Deanna felt she should be shocked, should be frightened. But looking at the pain in Preston's eyes, all she felt was sadness for whatever had brought him to this point. "Why did you stop?" she asked quietly. "There was a family. A man, his wife, 3 kids. The railroad wanted their land and they wouldn't sell. I was sent to convince them." Preston's hands clenched into fists on the table. The man fought back. He had an old rifle, probably hadn't been fired in years. He was just trying to protect his family and I. He couldn't finish the sentence. Deanna reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and rough, and she felt him tremble at her touch. "You shot him," she said gently. "I killed him in front of his wife and children. For a railroad that didn't need that particular piece of land, they just wanted it." The woman screamed and the children cried, and I stood there with smoke still rising from my gun and realized what I'd become. Preston's voice was barely a whisper. "I rode away that day and never went back. That was 8 months ago." Deanna kept her hand on his. "And you've been trying to make up for it ever since." "There's no making up for something like that, but I can't just keep doing nothing either. When I saw those bandits today, I couldn't walk away. Maybe if I save enough people, help enough folks, it'll balance the scales somehow." "That's why you wouldn't take payment from the merchant." Preston nodded. "Taking money would make it a job. What I did today, I did because it was right. That's the only kind of thing I want to do anymore." Deanna squeezed his hand. "You're trying to be a better man. That counts for something." "Does it?" Preston looked at her with such raw vulnerability that it took her breath away. "Because most days it feels like I'm just fooling myself." "You're not. A truly bad man wouldn't care, wouldn't feel remorse, wouldn't spend 8 months trying to atone." They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the table, 2 broken people finding unexpected connection. Deanna felt something opening in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since before her father died. This man, this haunted gunslinger trying to find redemption, made her feel less alone. "Tell me something good about yourself," Deanna said. "Something from before." Preston thought for a moment. "I was born in Texas. My parents had a small ranch outside of San Antonio, nothing fancy, but it was home. My father taught me to ride before I could walk proper, or so my mother said. We had cattle, some horses. It was a good life. What happened? Comanche raid when I was 16. They killed my parents, burned the ranch. I survived because I was out checking fences on the far side of the property. By the time I got back, it was too late." Diana's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." "After that, I drifted. Did odd jobs, learned to shoot, got good at it, too good. The railroad found me in a saloon in Abilene, offered me work and steady pay. I was 20 years old and angry at the world, seemed like a good idea at the time. And now I'm trying to figure out who I am without the anger, without the gun. It's harder than I thought it would be." Diana withdrew her hand slowly. "Thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't easy. Why aren't you running away from me? Most decent women would." "Because I don't think you're the man you're afraid you are. And because life is too short to run from people who might actually matter." Preston looked at her with something like wonder. "You're a strange woman, Deanna Foster. Strange enough to ask if you'll stay in Empire City for a while." "I meant what I said about not knowing anyone here. I could use a friend." "I don't stay anywhere long. It's safer that way." "Safer for whom? Or are you just running from yourself?" The words were harsh, but Deanna kept her voice gentle. Preston flinched as if she'd struck him, then slowly nodded. "Maybe you're right," he admitted. "Maybe I am running, but I don't know how to stop. Start by staying one more day, then one more after that, see what happens." Preston was quiet for so long Deanna thought he'd refuse. Finally, he said, "One more day, but I'm not making any promises beyond that." Deanna smiled, and it felt like a victory. One day is enough for now. They finished their meal talking about safer subjects. Deanna told him about her father's love of books, about growing up in a small Missouri town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Preston told her about learning to track from an old cavalry scout, about the beauty of the Texas hill country in spring. By the time they left the dining room, Deanna felt like she'd known him far longer than a few hours. Outside the hotel, the night air was cooling rapidly. Stars blazed overhead, more than Deanna had ever seen in her life. The sound of piano music and laughter drifted from the saloons down the street. "I should let you get some rest," Preston said, settling his hat back on his head. "It's been a long day. Will I see you tomorrow? I'll be around. Got to see about stabling my horse for the night and finding a place to sleep myself." "Mrs. Patterson said your usual room was available." Preston shook his head. "Can't afford it right now. There's a stable down the street where the owner lets me sleep in the loft when I'm in town." Deanna frowned. "That can't be comfortable. I've slept in worse places." Before she could think better of it, Deanna said, "Stay here at the hotel. I'll pay for your room." "No." The word was flat and final. "I don't take charity, Deanna. It's not charity, it's repayment for saving my life." "I told you I don't want payment." They stood facing each other in the lamplight, both stubborn. Finally, Deanna sighed. "At least let me buy you breakfast tomorrow. You can't refuse me that." A real smile touched Preston's lips, transforming his face. "Breakfast I can accept." "Good. Meet me here at 8. I'll be here." Preston tipped his hat and walked away into the night, leading his horse toward the stable. Deanna watched until he disappeared into the shadows, then climbed the stairs to her room. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind full of the day's events. She should be thinking about finding work, about settling into this new town. Instead, all she could think about was a gunslinger with storm-cloud eyes and a soul full of regret. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Deanna dressed carefully in her best day dress and went downstairs at 8. Preston was already there, cleaned up and waiting by the door. He'd shaved and his dark hair was damp, probably from the pump in the stable yard. "Morning," he said, his eyes warming when he saw her. "Sleep well, better than I expected. You?" The hay was comfortable enough. They ate breakfast in the hotel dining room, eggs and bacon and strong coffee. Deanna asked about the town, and Preston gave her a quick rundown of the major streets and businesses. He seemed more relaxed this morning, the shadows in his eyes a little lighter. "What are your plans for the day?" Preston asked as they finished their coffee. "I need to find work. I have enough money to last a few weeks if I'm careful, but I'll need steady income after that." "What kind of work are you looking for?" "I can read and write well, do figures." "I was thinking maybe a shop clerk, or perhaps the school needs a teacher's assistant." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "The general store might need help, and I know Miss Sarah Thornton runs the school. She's a good woman, fair. You could talk to her. Would you come with me?" "I don't know the town, and I'd feel better with someone beside me." Preston hesitated, then nodded. "I can do that." They spent the morning walking through Empire City together. The general store was busy, but the owner said he'd keep Deanna in mind if business picked up enough to need another clerk. The school was a neat building on the edge of town, and Miss Thornton, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, interviewed Deanna thoroughly before saying she could use someone to help with the younger children's reading and arithmetic. The pay wasn't much, but it would be enough with careful budgeting. "Can you start Monday?" Miss Thornton asked. "Yes, absolutely." Deanna felt relief wash over her. "Thank you so much." As they left the school, Deanna couldn't stop smiling. "I have a job. I actually have a job. I was so worried." "You did well in there," Preston said. "She's not an easy woman to impress." "How do you know her?" "I stopped a drunk cowboy from bothering her outside church one Sunday. She thanked me by telling me I had potential if I'd stop wasting my life." Preston's tone was wry. She's not wrong. They walked back toward the center of town, passing shops and houses, nodding to people they met. Deanna noticed how folks looked at Preston, some with respect, others with wariness. He was clearly known here, but she couldn't quite read how the town felt about him. At the edge of the main street, a commotion caught their attention. A crowd had gathered outside the marshal's office, and angry voices carried across the dusty street. Preston's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, then dropped to his side. "What's happening?" Deanna asked. "Don't know. But it doesn't sound good." They moved closer, and Deanna could see a tall man in a marshal's badge standing on the steps of his office, trying to calm the crowd. He was middle-aged and weathered, with a thick mustache and tired eyes. "I understand you're all worried," the marshal was saying. "But getting worked up won't help matters." "Easy for you to say, Marshal Cooper," a man shouted. "It's not your cattle getting rustled." "The Garson brothers hit another ranch last night," Preston murmured to Deanna. "That's what this is about." The name made Deanna's blood run cold. "The same men from yesterday, probably. They've been hitting ranches and stages for months now. Marshall's been trying to catch them, but they're slippery." A woman in the crowd called out, "When are you going to do something? We pay your salary to keep us safe, and you're letting these outlaws run wild." Marshal Cooper's face reddened. "I'm doing everything I can with the resources I have. I've wired for help from Santa Fe, but in the meantime, I suggest everyone travel in groups and keep your valuables secured." "That's not good enough," the crowd's anger was building. Deanna could feel the tension like a physical thing. Preston's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for trouble. Then someone noticed Preston standing there. "Hey, Nash, you're good with a gun. Why don't you help the marshal track down these bandits?" All eyes turned to them. Deanna felt Preston stiffen beside her. Marshal Cooper looked over, his expression unreadable. "Nash is a civilian," the marshal said carefully. "I appreciate the suggestion, but this is law enforcement business." "Nash used to do this kind of work for the railroad," another man called out. "Tracked down outlaws all the time. Saved those folks on the stage just yesterday." The crowd murmured agreement. Deanna saw Preston's hands clench into fists, saw the conflict on his face. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd been trying to avoid. "I'm retired from that line of work," Preston said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "The marshal will handle it. But you could help," someone insisted. "You know how these men think. Because I used to be one of them." Preston's voice was hard now. "And that's exactly why I won't do it anymore. Find someone else to do your killing." He turned and walked away, and Deanna hurried to follow him. Behind them, the crowd erupted in confused conversation, but Preston kept walking until they were several blocks away. He stopped beside a horse trough, gripping the edge with white-knuckled hands. "Preston," Deanna said softly. "They don't understand," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "They think it's simple. Track down the bad guys, shoot them, problem solved, but it's never that simple." "I know. Those Garson brothers, they're probably someone's sons. Maybe they have families or reasons they turned outlaw. Not good reasons, but reasons. And everyone wants me to kill them like it doesn't matter, like pulling a trigger doesn't leave a mark on your soul." Deanna moved to stand beside him, not touching but close. "You don't owe anyone your gun. But if I could help and don't, and someone else gets hurt because of it, isn't that on me too? No, you're not responsible for other people's violence. You're only responsible for your own choices." Preston looked at her, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes. "I want to be the kind of man you think I am, but I don't know if I can be. You already are. You just don't see it yet." They stood there in the morning sun, and Deanna felt the connection between them growing stronger. This man, with all his scars and regrets, was coming to mean something to her, something important. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get out of the street. Do you know somewhere quiet we could go?" Preston nodded slowly. "There's a place outside town, a little canyon with a creek. I go there sometimes when I need to think. Show me." They walked to the stable where Preston collected his horse, and then he boosted Deanna up to ride behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. They rode out of town into the desert landscape, following a dry wash that wound between red rock formations. After about 20 minutes, Preston guided the horse into a narrow canyon. The walls rose steep and red on either side, and suddenly, Deanna could hear water. They rounded a bend and came upon a small creek flowing over smooth stones, cottonwood trees providing shade along the banks. It was like an oasis in the middle of the harsh desert. Preston dismounted and helped Deanna down. He let his horse drink from the creek while they sat on a flat rock in the shade. The sound of the water was soothing, and birds called from the trees overhead. "I found this place about a year ago," Preston said. "Sometimes I come here when the town gets too loud or my thoughts get too heavy. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Deanna watched the play of light on water, listened to the rustle of leaves. Beside her, Preston seemed to be slowly relaxing, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" Deanna said. "Anything. What did you dream of being when you were young, before everything happened?" Preston was quiet for a moment, then said, "My father wanted me to take over the ranch. I think I wanted that too back then. Running cattle, working the land. It seemed like a good life." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "Sometimes I think about trying again. Finding some land, starting over. But I don't know if I deserve that kind of peace." "Everyone deserves peace, Preston. Even men who have done what I have. Especially men who have done what you have and regret it. Redemption has to mean something, or what's the point of trying?" Preston looked at her with such intensity that Deanna felt her breath catch. "How are you so sure about things? You're young, you've lost your father, you're alone in a strange town, and yet you seem so certain about what's right and wrong." "I'm not certain about anything. I'm terrified most of the time." Deanna smiled sadly. "But my father used to say that fear means you care enough to get things right, and I care about getting this right." "Getting what right?" "This. Us. Whatever this is becoming." The words hung in the air between them. Preston stared at her, and Deanna watched emotions flicker across his face too fast to name. Finally, he reached out and gently touched her cheek, his rough fingers impossibly tender. "Deanna, I'm not the kind of man you should get involved with. I've got too much blood on my hands, too many demons chasing me. Let me worry about that," Deanna said, leaning into his touch. "I'm a grown woman, Preston. I can make my own choices. And you choose this. You choose me. I'm starting to think I do." Preston leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. Deanna didn't move. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and questioning, a kiss that asked for permission even as it was happening. Deanna responded, her hand coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart pounding. The kiss deepened, and Deanna felt something inside her unfold like a flower toward the sun. This was different from anything she'd felt before. This was connection, understanding, the meeting of two lonely souls who recognized each other. When they finally pulled apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. "Then don't. Stay with me. Give this a chance. What if I can't be what you need? What if you already are?" They sat together by the creek, holding each other, listening to the water flow over stones. Deanna felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness she'd been missing since her father died. Maybe longer. This man, this broken gunslinger trying to find his way back to the light, felt like home. Eventually, they rode back to town in the golden afternoon light. Preston saw Deanna safely to the hotel, then said he had some things to take care of. Deanna went to her room and lay on her bed, replaying the day in her mind, touching her lips where Preston had kissed her. She must have dozed off because when she woke, the light outside was fading. Deanna washed her face and went downstairs, hoping Preston might be there. Instead, she found Mrs. Patterson at the desk looking worried. "Miss Foster, have you seen Mr. Nash?" Diana's stomach clenched. "Not since this afternoon." "Why?" "Marshal Cooper was here looking for him. Said it was urgent." Diana's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. "Did he say what it was about?" "Something about the Garson brothers. They hit another ranch this evening, shot a man trying to stop them. The marshal's trying to form a posse, and he specifically asked for Mr. Nash's help." Diana felt cold dread settle in her bones. "Where's the marshal's office?" "Down the street, 3 blocks east. But Miss Foster, you shouldn't." Deanna was already out the door. She ran down the street, her skirts gathered in her hands, not caring what people thought. The marshal's office was lit up, and she could see men gathered inside. She pushed through the door to find Marshal Cooper talking to a group of armed men. Preston stood apart from them, his face like stone. "Preston," Deanna said, breathless. He turned, and the look in his eyes made her heart break. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you. Not if you're thinking of doing what I think you're planning." Marshal Cooper looked between them. "Miss Foster, this is official business." "This is a mistake," Deanna said, looking only at Preston. "You don't have to do this." "A man is dying, Deanna. John Summers, a rancher with a wife and 4 kids. The Garson brothers shot him when he tried to stop them from stealing his cattle. He's not going to make it through the night." Preston's voice was rough with emotion. "His oldest boy is 14. Same age I was when I lost my parents. So you're going to what? Track them down and kill them. I'm going to stop them from hurting anyone else. By becoming the man you're trying not to be anymore." Deanna moved closer to him. "Preston, please, there has to be another way." "There isn't. Not one that happens fast enough to save the next family they target." Preston reached out and took her hands. "I have to do this, Deanna. If I don't, I'll never forgive myself." "And if you do, will you be able to forgive yourself for that?" Preston didn't have an answer. Marshal Cooper cleared his throat. "Nash, we need to ride out soon if we're going to track them in the morning light." "Give us a minute," Preston said, leading Deanna outside. They stood in the street, and Preston kept holding her hands as if afraid she'd disappear. "I know you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You think if you save this family, it'll make up for the one you destroyed. But it won't, Preston. It won't erase what happened. I know that. But I can't just stand by and do nothing." Deanna felt tears burning in her eyes. "What if you don't come back?" "I will, I promise." "You can't promise that. Men die on passes all the time." Preston pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Deanna buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sage and something uniquely Preston. She felt his lips in her hair. "I have to come back," he murmured. "I have someone waiting for me now. That's never happened before." Deanna looked up at him. "Then let that be enough. Stay with me. Let the marshal handle it." "I can't, Deanna. You know I can't." She did know. It was written in every line of his face, in the determination in his eyes. This was who Preston was, a man who couldn't walk away from people in need no matter what it cost him. It was part of what drew her to him and also what terrified her. "Then promise me you'll be careful," she said. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise." "And Diana, he stopped, seemed to struggle with words. "You matter to me. More than I thought anyone could matter anymore." "You matter to me too." Preston kissed her then, there in the street with half the town watching, a deep kiss that tasted of desperation and promise. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Wait for me," he said. "I will, just come back to me." Preston mounted his horse, joining the posse of 6 men that Marshal Cooper had assembled. Deanna watched them ride out into the gathering darkness, her heart in her throat. Mrs. Patterson came to stand beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He's good at what he does," the hotel keeper said. "He'll be all right. You can't know that." "No, but I can hope, and so can you." Deanna let herself be led back to the hotel, but she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window watching the street, watching the stars wheel overhead, praying to whatever gods might listen that Preston would come back safely. The next day dragged by in agony. Deanna went to the school to familiarize herself with the classroom she'd be helping in, but she could barely focus. Miss Thornton noticed her distraction but kindly didn't comment. Deanna returned to the hotel in the afternoon to find Mrs. Patterson had saved her some lunch. "Any word?" Deanna asked. "Not yet. These things take time." Another sleepless night. Deanna dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, hoping it might be Preston returning. By the morning of the 3rd day, she was exhausted and frightened. She'd known this man for only a few days, but already the thought of losing him was unbearable. She was having breakfast in the dining room when she heard shouting outside. Deanna ran to the window to see the posse riding back into town. She counted quickly. 6 men had gone out. She could see 7 horses returning. Her heart dropped until she realized the 7th horse was carrying something tied across its saddle. Not someone. Something. She pushed outside in time to see the posse stop in front of the marshal's office. The men looked exhausted, dusty and grim, but they were all accounted for, including Preston. Deanna ran to him as he dismounted. He turned just in time to catch her as she threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly and she could feel him shaking. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised, didn't I?" Around them, the town was gathering. Deanna heard Marshal Cooper explaining to the crowd. "We caught up with the Garson brothers about 30 miles north. They resisted arrest and 2 of them were killed in the exchange. The 3rd surrendered. He's in custody now." "Anyone hurt?" someone asked. "Nothing serious. We're all accounted for." Deanna pulled back to look at Preston's face. He had a bruise on his jaw and what looked like a powder burn on his sleeve, but otherwise seemed intact. His eyes, though, those told a different story. They held fresh shadows, new pain. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I will be. Now that I'm back with you." The crowd was celebrating, clapping the posse members on the back, praising them for a job well done. Preston extracted himself from the attention as quickly as possible, taking Deanna's hand and leading her away from the commotion. They walked to the edge of town in silence. Finally, Preston stopped and turned to face her. "I shot one of them, the youngest brother. He was maybe 20 years old and he drew on me and I shot him." Preston's voice was hollow. "I told myself this time was different, that I was doing it to protect people. But in the end, a man is still dead by my hand." Deanna took both his hands in hers. "Did you have a choice?" He drew first. "If I hadn't shot, he would have killed me or someone else in the posse." "Then it was self-defense. That's different from what you did before." "Is it, though? He's still just as dead." "Preston, look at me." Deanna waited until his eyes met hers. "You are not the same man you were. Your intentions were different. Your reasons were different. That has to count for something. Marshal Cooper offered me a deputy position, said the town could use someone with my skills." Preston laughed bitterly. "Can you imagine me as a lawman?" "I can, actually." "Why is that funny?" "Because 6 months ago I was the kind of man a lawman would have arrested. Now I'm supposed to pin on a badge and enforce the law. 6 months ago you made different choices. Now you're making better ones. That's called growth, Preston. That's called change." Preston stared at her as if she'd said something profound. "You really believe I can be someone different, don't you?" "I know you can. I've seen it." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You offered me shelter from bandits," Deanna said, smiling against his chest. "Remember, best decision I ever made." They stood there holding each other as the sun climbed higher, as the sounds of the town drifted over to them. Finally, Deanna said, "What are you going to tell the marshal?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to pin on that badge, try to do some good officially, but another part is terrified that I'll just end up becoming what I was before." "Then take time to think about it. You don't have to decide today." Preston nodded slowly. "You're right. And first, I need to do something I should have done days ago." "What's that?" He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. "Ask if I can take you to dinner again, properly like a gentleman courting a lady." Diana's heart soared. "Are you courting me, Preston Nash?" "I'd like to if you'll let me. I know I'm not much of a catch. I don't have money or property or a respectable profession, but I promise I'll try every day to be the kind of man worthy of you." "You're already worthy. And yes, I'll let you court me." Preston's smile widened into something joyful, transforming his whole face. He looked years younger, the shadows briefly banished. "Then will you have dinner with me tonight? I would be honored." They walked back to town hand in hand, and Diana felt as if she were floating. People nodded to them as they passed, and she realized the whole town probably knew by now that she and Preston were connected. In a place this small, secrets didn't last long. That evening, Preston met her at the hotel dressed in what must have been his best shirt and with his hair neatly combed. He'd even trimmed his beard. Deanna wore her nicest dress, a deep blue one that brought out her eyes. They ate at a small restaurant on the edge of town, quieter than the hotel dining room. Over steak and vegetables, they talked about everything and nothing. Preston told her about the stars he'd learned to navigate by, about the first horse he'd ever trained. Deanna told him about her dream of someday opening a library in a small town, about her love of poetry. "I never learned to appreciate books," Preston admitted. "My schooling was pretty basic." "I could read to you sometime if you'd like. There's something wonderful about hearing a story told aloud." "I'd like that." After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets. The evening was cool, stars brilliant overhead. Preston kept her hand tucked in his arm, and Diana felt safe in a way she hadn't since her father died. "Can I ask you something?" Preston said. "Anything." "What do you want? I mean, for your future. You mentioned teaching and libraries, but what does your life look like in your dreams?" Deanna thought about it carefully. "I want to matter. I want to help people, especially children, discover that the world is bigger than they think. I want to build something lasting, whether it's a school or a library or just a home full of books and love." She glanced up at him. "And I want to share that with someone who understands. Someone like me. Someone exactly like you." Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing beneath a large cottonwood tree at the edge of town, the leaves rustling softly overhead. "Deanna, I need you to understand something. I'm trying to be better, to leave my past behind. But I'm not perfect. I have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back in the war or riding for the railroad. I have days when I can barely stand to be around people. If you tie yourself to me, you're taking on all of that. And if I'm willing to, then I'd be the luckiest man alive." Preston cupped her face in his hands. "I'm falling in love with you, Deanna Foster. I didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but here we are." Diana's breath caught. "I'm falling in love with you too. It's fast and probably foolish, but I can't seem to help it." "Nothing about you is foolish." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Diana felt the rest of the world fall away. There was only Preston, only this moment, only the certainty that somehow, against all odds, she'd found exactly who she needed. When they finally made it back to the hotel, Mrs. Patterson was waiting with a knowing smile. "Mr. Nash, I believe your usual room is still available if you'd like it." On the house this time. Preston looked startled. "Mrs. Patterson, I can't accept." "Yes, you can. Consider it payment for keeping our town safe. And besides," she winked at Deanna, "I suspect you'll be staying in town for a while longer now." Preston looked at Deanna, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," he said. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, that's very kind. I'm not usually kind, Mr. Nash, but I recognize a good thing when I see it." She handed him a key. "Third floor, end of the hall, quietest room in the hotel." That night, Deanna lay in bed thinking about Preston sleeping 2 floors above her. The thought made her smile. He was staying. Maybe just for a few days, but it was a start. And every day he stayed was another day for them to build whatever this was growing between them. The next morning was Sunday, and Deanna was surprised when Preston appeared at her door dressed in clean clothes and holding his hat nervously. "I was thinking, if you're not opposed to it, maybe we could go to church together. I haven't been in a long time, but I'd like to try again." Deanna's heart swelled. "I'd like that very much." They walked to the small white church at the center of town. People stared as they entered together, and Deanna heard the whispers. Preston's jaw was tight, but he kept his head high, guiding her to a pew near the back. The service was simple and heartfelt. The minister, an elderly man named Reverend Michaels, preached about redemption and second chances. Deanna saw Preston listening intently, saw something shift in his expression. When they sang hymns, Preston's deep voice joined hers, slightly off-key but sincere. After the service, people approached them on the church steps. To Diana's surprise, most were friendly. Several townspeople thanked Preston for his help with the Garson brothers. Miss Thornton gave Deanna an approving nod. Even Marshal Cooper came over to shake Preston's hand. "Offer still stands," the marshal said quietly. "Think about it." As they walked back toward the hotel, Preston seemed lighter. "That wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. People can surprise you sometimes. You certainly surprised me." They spent the day together, walking around town, talking with shopkeepers and townspeople. Deanna was starting to get a feel for Empire City, starting to imagine herself building a life here. And in every image of that future, Preston was there beside her. That evening, they sat on the porch of the hotel, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and gold. Preston had his arm around Diana's shoulders, and she leaned against him contentedly. "I'm going to take the deputy position," Preston said suddenly. Deanna looked up at him in surprise. "You are? Marshal Cooper needs the help, and I need a purpose that's about more than just running from my past. Maybe this is my chance to actually build something good." "I think that's wonderful. It won't be easy. People will remember what I was. They'll question whether I can be trusted with authority. Then you'll prove them wrong." Deanna took his hand. "I believe in you, Preston, and I think you're starting to believe in yourself too." He kissed her forehead. "How did you get so wise?" "My father used to say that pain teaches what happiness cannot. I've had my share of pain. I suppose it taught me something." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Deanna thought about how much her life had changed in less than a week. She'd come to Empire City expecting to start over alone, expecting to build a quiet life teaching children and keeping to herself. Instead, she'd found this complicated, beautiful man who made her heart race and her soul feel at peace simultaneously. "Diana," Preston said softly, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know something. I'm in this. Whatever this is between us, I'm committed to seeing where it goes." "So am I." "Good." He smiled and pulled her closer. because I have a feeling we're going to be something special." The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Preston accepted the deputy position and began working alongside Marshal Cooper. He was good at the job, Deanna saw. Fair and calm, with an ability to talk people down from conflicts before they escalated. The town began to trust him, began to see him as more than just a hired gun looking for redemption. Diana started her work at the school, helping the younger children with their lessons. She loved the work, loved watching young minds open to new ideas. Miss Thornton became a friend, and gradually other women in town began to include Deanna in their gatherings. Every evening, Preston would meet Deanna after school, and they'd walk together through the town or out into the desert. They talked about everything, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building the foundation of something lasting. Preston's nightmares became less frequent, though they never fully disappeared. On the nights when he woke shouting, Diana would hold him until the trembling stopped, until he remembered where he was and that he was safe. 2 months after they met, Preston took Deanna back to the canyon with the creek. It was a cool October day, the cottonwoods turning gold. They sat on their favorite rock and Preston seemed nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Deanna, I need to ask you something," she smiled, knowing what was coming. "Go ahead." Preston pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's. It's the only thing I have left from my family. I know we haven't known each other long, but I also know I don't want to spend my life without you in it." He took a deep breath. "Deanna Foster, will you marry me?" Deanna felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes, absolutely yes." Preston's face broke into a wide smile. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, and Deanna tasted salt from both their tears. They were both crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed with joy. "I love you," Preston said. "I never thought I'd get to say that to anyone and mean it." "I love you too, and I'm so glad you offered me shelter that day. And I'm glad you offered me peace." They were married in November in the same white church where they'd attended their first service together. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Deanna wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her alter, and Preston wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony, speaking about love and redemption and the grace of second chances. When Preston kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause. Deanna felt her heart might burst with happiness. This man, this wonderful, complicated man, was her husband. They were building a life together, building something neither of them had thought possible. Marshal Cooper gave them the use of his small cabin on the edge of town for their first week of marriage. It was simple but private, with a fireplace and a big bed and windows that looked out over the desert. They spent those days learning each other in new ways, talking and laughing and making love, building memories to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. "I never thought I could be this happy," Preston said one evening as they lay tangled together in bed. "After everything I'd done, everything I'd lost, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people." Deanna traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of pain survived. "You deserve this. You deserve every good thing. I have you. That's more than I ever hoped for." They returned to town to find that the community had surprised them with a small house near the school. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Townspeople had donated furniture, dishes, linens. Miss Thornton had even started a small collection of books for Deanna. "The town takes care of its own," Mrs. Patterson explained as Deanna stood in her new home with tears streaming down her face. "And you two are ours now." Deanna and Preston settled into married life with surprising ease. Preston worked as deputy, and Deanna taught at the school. In the evenings, they'd sit on their porch and watch the sunset, talking about their days. Preston's demons didn't disappear, but they grew quieter. The nightmares came less often. The guilt that had weighed him down began to lighten. "You saved me," he told Deanna one night. "I was drowning in what I'd done, and you threw me a line." "We saved each other," Deanna corrected. "I was lost too, remember? Alone and scared in a new place. You gave me safety, and that gave me the courage to build a life here." Winter came to New Mexico, cold nights and occasionally snow dusting the desert. Deanna discovered she was pregnant in January. She told Preston over breakfast, watching his face transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy. "A baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby." In late summer, the doctor thinks. Preston came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "I'm going to be a father. I never thought I'd get that chance. You'll be a wonderful father." "I hope so. I want to be better than my demons, Deanna. I want to give this child a life full of love and safety." "You will. I know you will." Their son was born in September of 1879, exactly 1 year after Deanna had arrived in Empire City. They named him Samuel, after Preston's father. He was a healthy baby with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Preston held him with such tenderness that Deanna fell in love with her husband all over again. "Hello, Samuel," Preston whispered to his sleeping son. "I promise I'm going to be the father you deserve. I'm going to teach you right from wrong, how to be strong and kind. I'm going to love you every single day of your life." Deanna watched her husband with their baby and knew that Preston had finally found his redemption. Not through violence or grand gestures, but through the simple act of choosing love over fear, day after day. The years that followed were good ones. Preston proved to be everything he'd promised as a father. When Samuel took his first steps, Preston was there to catch him. When the boy fell and scraped his knee, Preston bandaged it and kissed it better. He taught Samuel to ride, to respect all living things, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. Deanna expanded her teaching, eventually taking over as head teacher when Miss Thornton retired. She also made good on her dream of starting a library, convincing the town council to dedicate a room in the town hall for books. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Marshall Cooper retired in 1881, and Preston was offered the marshal position. He accepted after long discussions with Deanna, wanting to make sure she was comfortable with the added responsibility and danger. Under Preston's leadership, Empire City remained one of the safest towns in New Mexico Territory. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace in 1882 and another son named Thomas in 1885. Their house was always full of noise and laughter, of children's questions and bedtime stories. Preston never forgot where he'd come from, but he stopped letting his past define him. He was a husband, a father, a lawman. He was a man who had made mistakes and was spending his life making amends. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Deanna and Preston would sit on their porch and remember that day on the road when 3 bandits had tried to rob a stagecoach. They'd marvel at how one moment could change everything, how offering help and accepting love could transform 2 broken people into something whole. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked one such evening, his arm around Deanna as they watched the stars. "Taking a chance on someone like me?" "Never, not for 1 second." Deanna looked up at her husband, at the face she'd learned to read better than any book. "You gave me shelter when I needed it most, and I like to think I gave you something too." "You gave me everything," Preston said. "You gave me peace, Deanna. You gave me a reason to be better. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other a future," Deanna said. "That's what love does. In 1890, Samuel was 11 and talking about maybe becoming a teacher like his mother. Grace was 8 and obsessed with horses, following her father around whenever she could. Thomas was 5 and full of questions about everything. Preston was 38, the silver threading through his dark hair only making him more handsome. Deanna was 34, happy in ways she'd never imagined possible. The library had grown to fill 2 rooms now, and children from farms miles away would come to town just to browse the shelves. Deanna's teaching had touched hundreds of lives, and she received letters from former students who'd gone on to college or started businesses or were teaching in other towns. Preston was respected throughout the territory as a fair and capable lawman. He'd broken up rustling operations, mediated disputes, and kept Empire City safe. But more than that, he'd become a symbol of redemption, proof that people could change if given the chance and the support to do so. On their 12th anniversary, Preston took Deanna back to the canyon where he'd proposed. The children were with Mrs. Patterson, who'd become their adopted grandmother. It was a warm autumn day, much like the one when they'd first kissed in this very spot. 12 years, Preston marveled as they sat by the creek. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday. Do you miss it? The freedom of moving around, not being tied down. Preston looked at her in surprise. Not for a second. This life, our family, this town, it's everything I never knew I wanted. I spent years running from my past, thinking I couldn't settle anywhere, but the truth is, I was just running toward you. I just didn't know it yet. Deanna leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. I came to Empire City thinking I'd build a quiet life alone. Instead, I found you, found us, found home. Home, Preston repeated softly. That's exactly what it is. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the water flow over stones, watching hawks circle overhead. The canyon hadn't changed, but they had. They'd grown together, weathered storms together, built a life together. The scared young woman fleeing bandits and the guilt-ridden gunslinger seeking redemption were both still part of who they were, but they weren't defined by those moments anymore. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Preston pulled Deanna to her feet. "Dance with me," he said. "There's no music." "Sure there is. Listen." Deanna closed her eyes and heard what he meant. The creek provided rhythm, the wind in the cottonwoods added melody, and their heartbeats kept time. Preston held her close, and they swayed together as the day faded into evening. "I love you, Deanna Nash," Preston whispered. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving." "I love you too," Deanna replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me in." They rode home as stars appeared overhead, the same stars that had watched over them 12 years ago when their story began. Their children ran out to greet them, and Preston swung Grace up into his arms while Samuel helped Deanna down from the horse. Thomas clung to Preston's leg, chattering about his day. Later, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Preston and Deanna stood on their porch looking out at the town they'd helped build. Lights glowed in windows up and down the street, each one representing a family, a life, a story. They were all part of the same tapestry, woven together by choice and chance and love. "No regrets?" Deanna asked, repeating the question Preston had asked years ago. "Not a single one," Preston confirmed. He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You know what I was thinking about today?" "What's that?" "Those bandits on the road, the Garson brothers. If they hadn't attacked that stagecoach, I might have ridden right past you. We might never have met. So, in a strange way, we owe them our happiness." Preston laughed. "I don't know if I'd go that far. But I am grateful for every twist of fate that brought us together. Even the painful ones, especially those. They made us who we are, and I like who we are." Deanna turned in his arms to face him. In the lamplight spilling from their window, she could see the man she'd fallen in love with, older now but still the same in all the ways that mattered. His eyes still held shadows sometimes, reminders of what he'd done and who he'd been. But they also held love and joy and hard-won peace. "Tell me something," Deanna said. "If you could go back and change your past, erase all the bad things you did, would you?" Preston considered the question carefully. "A year after I met you, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now I'm not sure. Those choices led me here, to you, to our children, to this life. If I erased them, would I erase all of this too?" He shook his head. "I can't say I'm grateful for the pain I caused or the lives I hurt, but I am grateful for the lessons I learned. They taught me the value of what I have now." "That's very wise. I learned from the best." Preston smiled at her. "You taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a future that honors what you've learned from your mistakes." They stood together in the cool night air, wrapped in each other's arms, and Deanna felt the rightness of everything. This man, this life, this moment, all of it was exactly as it should be. The road had been hard and the journey unexpected, but they'd found their way to where they belonged. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel did become a teacher, taking over Diana's classes when she eventually retired. Grace married a rancher and had 4 children of her own, all of whom inherited her love of horses. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, fighting for justice in the courts the way his father had fought for it in the streets. Preston served as marshal until he was 55, when he finally hung up his badge and spent his days helping Deanna at the library and spoiling his grandchildren. The nightmares had long since faded, replaced by dreams of the future and memories of the beautiful life he'd built. Diana wrote a book in her later years, a collection of stories about the early days of Empire City. In it, she told their story, how a cowboy had offered her shelter from bandits, and she had offered him peace from his demons. It wasn't published widely, but it sat on the shelf in the library she'd founded, and children who read it always asked if it was true. "Every word," Deanna would tell them. "Love and redemption are real if you're brave enough to reach for them." On their 40th anniversary, Preston and Deanna stood once more in the canyon by the creek. They were older now, gray-haired and moving more slowly, but their love had only deepened with time. Preston still held Deanna's hand the same way he had 40 years ago, and Deanna still looked at him with the same mix of love and wonder. "40 years," Preston said, shaking his head in amazement. "We've been married longer than I was alive before I met you. And I'd do every one of those years again without changing a thing. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they taught us how to be strong together." Preston pulled her into his arms and they danced again by the creek, slower this time but no less meaningful. The sun set over the canyon walls, painting everything in shades of gold, and somewhere in the distance a hawk called to its mate. Life was good. Life was full. Life was exactly what they'd both fought so hard to build. "Thank you," Preston whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For giving me a reason to be better. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your heart, for building this beautiful life with me." They returned home as darkness fell, to a house full of children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate their anniversary. There was food and laughter and stories told around the dinner table. Samuel told his children about how Grandpa used to be the fastest draw in New Mexico. Grace's oldest boy begged to hear again how Grandma had stood up to bandits. Thomas raised a toast to the 2 people who taught him that love was the greatest law of all. Later, When everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Preston and Deanna lay in bed together. They'd shared this bed for 40 years, weathered joy and sorrow, raised 3 children, buried friends, celebrated triumphs. The mattress had a familiar sag, the quilts had been patched many times, but it was theirs. It was home. "Diana," Preston said softly in the darkness. "Yes." "I just wanted you to know. If I could live my life over again, I wouldn't change a thing. Not one single thing. Because every choice, every mistake, every moment of pain led me to you. And you were worth all of it." Diana felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you, Preston Nash. I loved you from the moment you rode up to that stagecoach, and I'll love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, always and forever." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. 2 souls who'd found their way through darkness to light, through pain to peace, through loneliness to love. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every significant moment of their shared life. And in the morning, they would wake together as they had for 40 years, ready to face another day side by side. Because that was what love meant, not the absence of demons, but having someone to help you face them. Not the erasure of past mistakes, but the courage to build something better from the lessons learned. Preston had offered Deanna shelter from bandits on a dusty New Mexico road. Diana had offered Preston peace from the demons that haunted him. And together, they had built a love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of second chances and the grace of redemption. Their story became legend in Empire City, told and retold until it took on the weight of myth. But those who knew them, who had witnessed their love firsthand, knew that no story could truly capture the depth of what they'd built together. It wasn't just romance, though their love remained strong until their final days. It was partnership, friendship, faith, and the daily choice to see the best in each other even when the world saw only flaws. When Preston finally passed away at 78, Deanna held his hand and reminded him of that day on the road. "You saved me," she whispered. "We saved each other," Preston replied, his voice weak but certain. "Best day of my life was offering you shelter. Second best was every day after." Deanna lived 3 more years, spending her time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, finishing her book of stories, tending the library that had grown to fill an entire building. When she died peacefully in her sleep at 77, her family found her with a smile on her face and Preston's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. They were buried side by side in the Empire City Cemetery, beneath a cottonwood tree with a view of the desert they'd both loved. Their joint headstone reads simply, "Preston and Deanna Nash. He offered her shelter. She offered him peace. Together they found home." And that, in the end, was the truest measure of their love, not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the quiet building of a life together. Not the absence of darkness, but the presence of light. Not perfection, but the persistent choice to be better together every single day. Their story lived on in the hearts of those who knew them, passed down through generations as an example of what love could be when it was brave enough, patient enough, and strong enough to weather any storm. In a wild and often unforgiving land, they had carved out a space for grace, for redemption, for the radical act of believing that people could change and love could heal even the deepest wounds. The cowboy had offered her shelter from bandits. She had offered him peace from his demons. And together, they had built something that would last far beyond their years, a love story for the ages, rooted in the red earth of New Mexico and reaching toward the endless sky.